The radical Reconstruction era was a time when the United States began to tackle the immense challenge of rebuilding the South while simultaneously securing rights for millions of newly freed African Americans. Following the Civil War, the country faced deep divisions, and figuring out how to reunite a broken nation was no easy task. In 1867, Congress passed the Radical Reconstruction Act, which became a turning point in American history. This act divided the South into 5 military districts, each governed by a Union general. The goal was clear. Before a state could rejoin the Union, it had to meet several critical requirements. First, states were required to grant the vote to African American men, while stripping voting rights from former Confederate leaders. Second, military commanders in the South had to oversee the registration of eligible voters, both black and white, while ensuring that new state constitutions guaranteed black suffrage. Finally, the states had to ratify the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship and equal protection under the law to all people born in the United States, including former slaves. President Andrew Johnson, however, wasn't a fan of these measures. He vetoed the Reconstruction Act, but Congress quickly overrode his veto, signaling their determination to see the South transformed. Now, tensions between President Johnson and the Congress hit a boiling point in 1867, with each side looking for opportunities to destroy the other. Congress struck first after Johnson fired Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War appointed by Abraham Lincoln in early 1868. A president firing a member of his cabinet seems like normal business, but in this case it sparked a political firestorm. Congress had previously passed a Tenure of Office Act, which proclaimed that cabinet officials couldn't be fired without approval of the Senate. They had passed such a measure for fear that Johnson would remove all of the cabinet members that had been appointed by Abraham Lincoln at the beginning of his term. Since Stanton had been appointed by Abraham Lincoln, President Johnson believed that he had the right to make such a decision. In response to Stanton's firing, the House of Representatives impeached Johnson, accusing him of high crimes and misdemeanors. The impeachment trial lasted 11 weeks, with Johnson being charged on 11 counts of misconduct, mostly related to violating the separation of powers by defying Congress. When the Senate finally got around to voting, they fell just one vote short of the 2/3 majority needed to remove Johnson from office. Though he remained in power, Johnson's influence was effectively neutered for the rest of his presidency. The 1868 election saw Ulysses S. Grant emerge as the Republican candidate, riding a wave of popularity from his actions during the Civil War. Grant supported radical Reconstruction, but also pushed for reconciliation between North and South. The Democrats nominated Horatio Seymour, but his candidacy was doomed from the start, as the Democrats still hadn't shaken off the stain of disloyalty from the Civil War. Grant won decisively, capturing 214 out of 294 electoral votes. Under Grant's presidency, Reconstruction policies deepened. One of the most significant milestones was the 15th Amendment, which guaranteed the right to vote to all male citizens, regardless of race or previous condition of servitude. While this amendment was a monumental achievement for African American men, it didn't come without compromises. The amendment allowed for the possibility of poll taxes and literacy tests, which were designed to keep certain groups, like poor whites and immigrants, from voting. But the group that was most affected by the policies were newly freed African Americans. The 15th Amendment also did not extend the right to vote to women, despite calls from leading suffragists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. This caused a deep rift within the women's rights movement. Some, like Frederick Douglass, argued that black male suffrage had to come first, given the violent repression African Americans faced in the South. Douglass famously said, "When women, because they are women, are hunted down, dragged from their homes, and hung upon lampposts, then they will have an urgency to obtain the ballot equal to our own." Stanton and Anthony, however, were deeply disappointed and chose to form the National Women's Suffrage Association, dedicated to pursuing voting rights exclusively for women. Meanwhile, despite new freedoms, many African Americans faced crushing economic challenges. Under President Johnson's amnesty plan, plantations that had been confiscated during the war were returned to their former white owners, leaving freed slaves with little to no land of their own. Without land, most had no choice but to return to work for their former enslavers. The result was the rise of sharecropping, a system where freedmen would rent land and pay for it with a portion of their harvest, usually half. However, because many freedmen started with nothing, they quickly fell into debt. Storekeepers loaned money at high interest rates, trapping sharecroppers in a cycle of poverty. Despite these hardships, some efforts were made to help. In South Carolina, a land commission established in 1869 purchased property and resold it to landless freedmen on easier terms, allowing 14,000 black families to secure farms. But overall, the dream of land ownership remained out of reach for most. By the early 1870s, the Union League, a secret Republican organization that began during the Civil War, played a vital role in helping African Americans navigate the new political landscape. The League organized meetings and educated newly enfranchised black voters on political issues and voting procedures. Working alongside the Freedmen's Bureau, the Bureau not only helped former slaves with basic needs, but also established colleges like Fisk, Tougaloo, and Hampton Institute, which focused on training teachers and uplifting the newly freed population. Known today as part of the network of historically black colleges, these schools paved the way for creating economic opportunities for Southern African Americans. Still, many white Southerners resented the presence of Northern carpetbaggers and Southern scallywags who supported Reconstruction. African Americans were also making strides politically, with some holding public office for the first time. Robert Smalls, a former slave turned Civil War hero, and Blanche K. Bruce, the second black U.S. Senator from Mississippi, were among these pioneering leaders. Reconstruction brought sweeping changes, but also deep resistance. As we move forward, we'll see how Reconstruction efforts began to unravel and how the South fought back against these reforms.